Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations.
In this episode of the North Group podcast, we will be tackling the question, how do you build trust in an environment that lacks it? I'm Gina Breslin, and today I'm joined by my colleague and good friend, Kent Hartzler. So Kent, tell me, how do you build trust in an environment that lacks it?
Well, Gina, we can make this really short. Short answer is be authentic, and it takes time.
Okay.
And podcast.
And the podcast right there. So let me throw this at you. I was in a meeting not that long ago with a gentleman, and we were talking about him, and he's working with someone pretty closely and does not trust this person at all. And he says to me, if I could negatively trust this person, I would.
Negative trust.
That's how bad it is. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, we've got some work to do. So where would you begin in that situation? That feels tough. What do we know about trust, and where would you start?
Yeah, Gina, and that's why I think this is such a good conversation, is because your story sounds hard. And yet I think people can really relate to stories like that and experiences like that, not just individually, but in the workplace as well. Where would I start? I had a former colleague that said, trust is truth over time. And I like that for a lot of different reasons. It's concise, it's short. But if we unpack that a little bit, what's that truth look like? We could think, and hopefully throughout this conversation, we'll think about words, actions, our behaviors, but then ultimately our intentions, what's underneath those that I think help build or restore trust in this case.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Truth over time.
Yeah.
Because I think in that situation, there's some behaviors there that over time have led to this, quote unquote, if I could negatively trust this person, I would.
Absolutely. And when you think about a topic like trust is fluid. It's never static or never just stays the same. And so we're either always building trust, or sometimes, even though we're not intending it, trust can erode. And so that's why I think, when we always need to be working at building a reserve or building trust through our words reliably, consistently. And then underneath that, as we get into talking about what trust really is, what's the intentions? What's the really intent behind the relationship?
Yeah, sure. So it might be obvious, but why is trust important? So we're taking a lot of time today to talk about trust. And
in fact, trust is something so important. I don't think we can overstate how important it is. We do a lot of work using Patrick Lencioni's material, and he talks about organizational health and how it's the single most important competitive advantage an organization can have. And what does he start with? What's the foundation?
Right. He starts with trust.
It's trust. So trust is paramount.
And Stephen Covey's, right, The Speed of Trust.
Yep.
His father's book, Stephen Covey Senior, I forget. But 7 Habits of Highly Effective People also talk about trust. So.
Correct. So I don't think we can overstate the importance. Anything, if you're going to build any type of relationship, again, individually or professionally, trust is going to be there. And even to sustain or have any type of depth in the relationship, trust is paramount.
Yeah. And we hear sayings like trust but verify, or, those people, I don't trust people easily. And sometimes folks say that as, a badge of honor that they wear, that we'll see if I can trust you.
Right. Yeah. And we're always evaluating trust. I mean, whether we give trust or whether we ourselves are a trustworthy person. And so there's very few interactions, Gina, that I don't think that are either building towards that or detracting from it. So trust can be fragile too. Think about how long, this is that over time part. Think about how long it takes to build trust and how quickly that can erode. It could be a single incident, or it could be just micro things over time that start to chip away at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. I think it's in the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where Stephen Covey talks about the idea of a bank account.
Right. Right. And I'm a former banker.
This is true.
Yep. So I
Good
worked
segue.
over 20 years in the financial services industry. And so a helpful metaphor that we could think about with trust is a bank account. And there's always transactions going in and out of it. The idea would be that we want to build a reserve.
Yeah.
We want to be trustworthy in our words, our behaviors, our actions, so that we're building up those reserves. Because let's face it, right, Gina? We're not always our best self every day. And so even unintentionally, those things that we might do or say, or even how we come across, we might need a reserve to kind of tap into that because there's things that we do that
Because we're not perfect.
We aren't.
Right? We're all human.
We are.
We're not perfect, unfortunately.
We can all relate to
Right?
this.
I mean, I try, but no, I'm kidding.
Exactly. So let's build a reserve of trust.
Sure.
Let's be leaders and individuals that try to build that bank account up so that there's equity there. When it's needed.
When it's needed, sure,
Yeah.
sure. It makes me think of a situation where a person I know actually quite closely made a pretty big mistake and had to go to someone and apologize. And it was a pretty big deal. He was pretty upset and just felt really badly about the depletion, the withdrawal, right, from the bank account that he did not intend to make, but he did. And in that moment, after the apology, he still seemed really upset. And I said, well, tell me more. Why are you still, I mean, you did the right thing. You apologized. And he said, well, will they ever trust me again?
Right.
How would you answer that?
Right. And that's where the take time comes in. If we're consistent, reliable, and we'll get into this, there's different levels of trust, but really the intentions behind that relationship.
Yeah.
I believe the answer would be yes.
You can build your way back or behave your way back into
can.
being trustworthy.
You can. And the story that you even described, we talk a lot about self-awareness as leaders. How do I perceive myself? How do others perceive me? How do others experience themselves when we're with me? That's all part of building trust as well and being aware of that.
Right. Because we've seen people who think they're trustworthy, but if you would survey the people who work closely with them,
There'd be a different
not so
story.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we define trust? I mean, what?
Yeah, trust is nuanced. There's different levels to trust. I think we can just start. I think it'll be fairly intuitive that predictability-based or reliability-based trust. This would be the kind of thing where, can you expect a certain thing from an individual? Kind of that what the individual's going to say or be. Are they going to follow up and do what they say? Are they going to keep their word?
Right.
Are they predictable? Can you rely? Now, there could be good elements and bad elements.
Sure.
But as a leader, are we consistent? Are we predictable? I think that's the first level of trust that we can think about.
Yeah. I completely agree. That predictability. And when you think you can predict someone's behavior, often we find ourselves adjusting how we behave based on what we think we can predict. And that's
right.
So connected to trust.
And underneath predictability or reliability-based trust, that we often think about three different levels even within that. We could say how committed is the person to their task or the relationship, commitment level.
Right.
Do they show up? Are they going to, like I said, do what they say? There's competence-based trust.
Sure.
Do they know what they're doing?
Right.
Are they good at what they're doing? Can you trust that they're competent?
Right.
And then the highest level, or the one that starts to get into deeper levels of trust, is character. And we all want to be people of character, people of integrity, people who are the same when we're alone as to when we're in public. So that is an important element as well.
Yeah, so those 3 C's, commitment, character, and competence. Yeah, well said. And then there's another type of trust called vulnerability-based trust.
Yeah, that's deeper level trust. And when teams or individuals start to experience this level of trust, it's powerful. There's really no limits to what could be accomplished or the depths of what that could look like. And so let's talk about vulnerability-based trust. And that's more than just being able to predict. That's being able to say, I trust this person so much that I can be my full, authentic self. Okay. I trust their intentions. I trust that I can ask the stupid question.
Yes.
I might not have the right answer. I can put my ego aside and really enter into this relationship knowing that the other person's intentions are that they're for my best.
Yeah, sure. When somebody is for you or have, like you mentioned, have your best interest at heart. Yeah, that's a game changer. The idea of vulnerability-based trust, or some people talk about a safe environment, if you will.
Right.
Where I can say, this is uncomfortable, or this is difficult for me, or, where you don't feel like you have to have it all together in that moment.
Right. And
Yeah.
we talk about environments. Think how powerful that would be when you don't have to play the politics. You don't always have to be wondering, what are people thinking about me? Or you know that your team or your leader that you're relating to, they have your best in mind.
Sure.
And you can't fake that, at least for very long.
That's true.
People will see it a mile away.
Right.
And we often, when we get into situations that we need to restore trust, we often start with, what are the leader's true intentions for the individual?
Sure.
Beyond just the utility that the person or the function that the person might serve, they really care about this individual.
That is true. It's so often it begins there, right? Do I feel like this person genuinely cares about me? Yeah.
And has my best in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Any examples of vulnerability-based trust?
I think, and hopefully the folks that are listening and engaging with this can also think of examples. There are many. I had one, though, that stands out, is I was working with a leader.
Okay.
And they made a mistake within their area of competence.
Okay.
And it was embarrassing for them.
Okay.
And so instead of using it as a teachable moment and just saying, I'm human too.
Sure.
I messed up. Not only did I mess up, this is subject matter that I'm responsible for. I'm the leader of. And they didn't do that. They covered it up.
Oops.
And in fact, not only them, but the CEO in the organization helped with the cover up.
Okay.
Here's what's interesting, Gina. This whole story was in a test environment. It was a training environment internally. So when you step back and look at that, it didn't really count for anything in terms of externally doing damage to the business. Think about how powerful that would have been if the leader would have stepped up and just owned it.
Yeah.
They didn't. And so what ended up happening was people found out about it.
Sure.
And it really,
'Cause they always do,
they
right?
always do. And it eroded not just this individual's trust, the CEO was complicit in it
Up
as
a
well.
level. Right.
None of that needed to happen if there would have been vulnerability in that type of environment.
Right.
Why, I'm not sure. We don't know why that was. But it ended up doing a lot of damage.
And so just the lack of being able to admit a mistake had a huge ripple effect. And
It did. And at the end of the day,
right along with it.
Right, the stakes you wouldn't have thought in that case were all of that high, in that it was just an internal training simulation.
Yeah.
Think about that. I mean, that response for that leader, it would have been hard. But if they would have stepped up and said, hey, teachable moment for all of us.
Yeah.
I even made a mistake. Think about how what that would have engendered.
Yeah.
As far as
It's
the leaders.
freeing, right? To know that you don't have to be perfect every day, or that, again, because we're not going to be. That's an impossible goal.
Why pretend? Why
Correct.
pretend?
Yeah, why fake it? It so connects back to Stephen Covey's book, The Speed of Trust.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're, taking away all what you just described there, those politics, we can be incredibly more efficient, more effective. That influence ripples throughout an entire organization.
When teams operate at that level, or when relationships are operating there, again, I don't think we talk about potential a lot at North Group. There's unlimited potential for teams and relationships that exhibit that.
Right.
And we know that there's a lot of constraints, though, if trust doesn't exist, or negative trust, as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah. So in my story at the beginning, this individual who said, my colleague, I negatively trust them. How could we have a conversation, or how could we go about talking? I mean, we're not going to control the other person.
Right.
We know we can't do that. But what are some things that maybe he could do? How could he work towards building trust? What suggestions would you have?
Yeah, I think it starts with the person. I mean, be the kind of person that, be yourself trustworthy if you want trust extended to you. And I would start there. And it can even be very small things. Be transparent, be authentic, follow through with your commitments, and just start to do that in the small things, because in a case like this, small things are big things.
Yes, that is true.
And then over time, to the extent that, again, predictability and reliability start to undergird that, slowly,
you start to build that bank account, right? Those reserves.
that would be the hope.
Yeah.
And it would take that person exhibiting to that person that that's real,
Sure.
that is genuine and sustainable. Not a guarantee, but put yourself out there and see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
Be that person.
Yeah, it is interesting because there is a level of boundaries that are involved in trust. I mean, eventually, if you're working to trust someone, there is, am I right? That there's
I think so.
there's a degree or a line somewhere that eventually maybe you need to part ways.
Right. And I think that does. I mean, that's why this conversation of trust it can be so huge and significant. We really have to look at the relationship and what's underneath that, because there are times where, depending on the situation,
Right.
it may not be in the best interest to work at that trust.
Right. Yep. Well said. I would agree with that. So begin by being trustworthy. I think one of my favorite points of this whole topic, and it's connected to the idea of the bank account, but you can behave your way back. If I were to leave our listeners and our viewers with anything, that would be it. We're going to make mistakes, and but we can continue. We can build up those reserves. What final words would you have?
I think that's true. And be predictable, be reliable, be intentional with the things that you can control, because we can't control everything. We can't control ultimately whether somebody trusts us, but to the extent that we model that and exhibit that and go first.
Right.
Sometimes as leaders, we need to go first. Again, over time, we have hope.
Yes.
We never lose hope, do we, Gina?
No, we do not.
Do our part and be consistent in that, the big and small things. And over time, we have hope that trust can be restored.
So look in the mirror first. Am I being trustworthy? And then go from there.
I can't think of a better place to start.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kent.
Thanks, Gina. It's a pleasure.